This one snuck up on me a little bit. I was on vacation for a week last week and didn't realize June was literally around the corner. But thank you guys for attending. The Unite Us team, I think you guys are new. Josephine, Elena, Alfonso have been here before, but a very brief introduction. I started design rounds in, I think the first session was March. And the purpose of it is I'm the solo designer at Flexpa, and healthcare is just such a complex space that, not only being the only designer, but being in a space that is so highly regulated and has so many moving parts, just wanted more people to talk to about the problems that we see, about the design challenges that we face, etc. So it's been really great so far. I think the conversations have been a lot of fun. I'm hoping that everyone gets something out of it each time as well. But it's very free form. So in the Eventbrite, I ask if you have any agenda items. So we're a little light on attendee agenda items this week, but there's a whole backlog of things that I'm interested in chatting with you guys about. So I'll bring those up today. And feel free, if there's any discussion topics you want to bring up, just throw it in the chat. The topics that I have are just meant to be starter pieces of conversation, so we can take it wherever we find is interesting and valuable. As everyone who's been here before knows, we like to keep our cameras on just because talking to squares is not that great. I know JJ and Jake, you guys are eating breakfast and lunch, so no worries, but whenever you guys finish that, if you would be willing to turn on your cameras, I think that would just make the environment a little bit better. In terms of talking, when the group is bigger, we like to use the raise hands option just so there's no like mute, unmute, oh, you go, I go, but here I think we have a very intimate group today, so feel free to just unmute and speak whenever. The last thing is in your, where is it again? In chat? No, in participants, you can change your name in Zoom. So we found it helpful to just change our names to be, like, for me, Angela Liu, design at Flexpa. So just so everyone is can see what company you're at, though half of us are from Unite Us. So I'll go ahead and do mine too, Angela Liu at Flexpa. I wish this stayed every time I was in Zoom, but there you go. All right. Did I miss anything else? Very last thing, this is just a specific for today. I do have to end design rounds 5 minutes early today. There's a meeting I have immediately after that I just need to reset and prep for very briefly. Cool. All right. Am I missing anything? Let's see. No. Okay, great. All right. So we'll go into our first topic. And this first one was actually from Alfonso. So thank you for submitting it. And this question is, I think it's a good starter question as well. But how much is healthcare a part of your identity as a designer? And when you speak, feel free, for the first time, feel free to just do a quick intro of yourself, your company, where you work, etc. But the question from Alfonso that I'll post in the chat is, how much is healthcare a part of your identity as a designer? I actually have a related question, so I'll use it as a prompt too. But in addition to identity as a designer, how do you guys stay on top of healthcare happenings? Like, which pieces of information are important to you? Where do you keep tabs on that? And how do you use it in your day-to-day? So to the extent that that is part of your identity as a designer in healthcare, curious to hear what people are doing there too.
Hi, JJ from Unite Us. I'd say that, well, first off, Unite Us is on the social care side of things, not necessarily healthcare specific. But I'd say part of the reason I like working here is because it does resonate with other parts of my life. I'm not in healthcare specifically, but I come from a bit of a healthcare family. My wife is a trauma surgeon, and my mother-in-law managed a medical office for a long time. So sort of been kind of embedded in that area for a while. And so sort of people care is just sort of part of what is kind of embedded in our family and how we approach things. And so I would live in Wisconsin, things like that. So when we moved here. So as a designer, I'd say the idea of caring for people resonated really well with me, having been a designer before I met my wife. As far as like looking out for people's experiences and making their lives better, I think there's a synergy there that is very, very strong for me.
I think about,
Go ahead.
oh yeah, Elena, go ahead.
Maybe we should still use the raise hand feature.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Hi, everybody. So for those of you I haven't met, my name is Elena. I work at Flatiron Health. We are a healthcare company. We're about 10 plus years old, I guess 11 now. And our focus is cancer care. We have two sides of our business. One side creates an EHR, software as a service, for cancer providers. And the other side is more about the data and research and using the data that comes through that EHR to create data sets and work with academics and sell those data sets that are much more comprehensive ways to do research around cancer. I would say, I think I have a similar answer to JJ, which is that I got into design specifically because I thought I was sort of in humanitarian work before, but I found really passionate about design is that it was a way to bring creativity to that kind of work. When I got into the industry, I discovered that it was much more complicated than that. Not just finding a job that was directly related to humanitarian work as a designer, but also that just working as a professional designer is a lot more complex than just saying, let me go solve this problem. I was working in financial services for a little while. I was working with groups who had low financial margins, and that work was great, but it still seemed a little messy to me. Part of the reason I moved on to healthcare was because I could see a much more direct connection in between the mission of a healthcare company and what I was able to contribute as a designer. No one would be shocked to hear that I got into healthcare and decided that was more complicated too, because, you know, every company still has to make money. I would say that I still see healthcare as a really direct way to have impact as a designer, positive impact as a designer. But I think that very few companies escape capitalism. And that might mean that one day I have to move on to something else that's even closer to mission.
I can go next. Sorry, I didn't do the raise hand thing. Hi, I'm Richard Aquina, senior UX designer at Unitas, based out of Washington State for the past 6 months. So I guess my foray into healthcare was kind of stumbled into it. I actually originally my academic background is in Japanese language translation and video game testing, things like that. When I came back to the States, oh, I'm sorry, do I have like questions like right now or like later or okay, after? Yeah. So when I got back to the States and moved back to Florida, I ended up taking a call center job at this health, like population health startup, like an accountable care organization, as like a call center for their app where, you know, doctors would call. You know, doctors are smart people with like 2 medical degrees, and they call and they're like, I got a new iPhone, I don't know how to use your app, help me. So so started off as there, and then I kind of snuck my way on to the dev team because we were making these products and the design was kind of like horrible. And I was like, hey, maybe you should do this. And then they're like, well, Richard, maybe you should design it. And like, maybe I will. And so it just kind of carried on like that for like 5 years. And so kind of like was doing like design stuff like before I even knew like UX design was like a thing. But I guess a lot of the kind of what kept me going is, you know, and of course everyone here, you know, knows how fragmented like the healthcare system in America is. You know, you have all of this information, you know, separated over multiple providers and, you know, companies and hospitals and things like that. And there's always a need for ways to connect that information, you know, in a way that's useful and that can, you know, affect real change. So there's always all these problems that, you know, we're facing that we needed solutions for. And that's kind of like what kind of kept me, you know, going deeper down the design rabbit hole path. And you know, and kind of learning how to navigate, you know, being able to design in advocate for solutions with you know, what is what's technically possible, or what's legal, or what your team or your stakeholders are willing to do. But yeah, so pretty much all of my career, really, design career, really has been in healthcare. So I guess that's that's the path I've been on. But that's me.
I forgot. Do the hands raise in like order for everyone, or is it like
Yeah, it's
random?
great.
Okay. Wanted to make sure. I'm Josephine. I'm a product designer at Redox. I've always been really interested in healthcare. Like I wanted to go down the route of like apply to med school and all that stuff, but then I started doing like volunteering, and like I was going to be like a CNA, and then I realized like I cannot stand blood. Like I just cannot physically be in a hospital unless like I need to go see a doctor. Like it just makes me really squeamish. I would not be able to handle patients. So I like pivoted to public health, and I think that pivot kind of made me realize like, oh, there's more that you can do in the healthcare field than just like directly interact with patients or work in like a clinic or a hospital setting. And I've always been really passionate about healthcare because both me and like my whole entire family, whether it just be like unlucky genes and like the dying environment, but we've all had pretty like unfortunate health issues. And so I've always been going in and out of like hospitals, whether it's for me or like for my family. And also because I partially lived in Taiwan, I've seen kind of the dichotomy in healthcare and accessibility. And so I know in the US, like it's not going to happen overnight where we suddenly get universal healthcare, but I feel like there are many smaller steps that we can take to at least make the process less painful. Like I think like the patient portals are like a great first step. It's still very capitalistic, but at the very least, like we're not asking people to like physically come in anymore. But all of that is to say, I've always been really interested in the space. And so when I found out about like health tech design, or specifically like health tech as an industry, since I'm from Seattle, it was like really eye-opening that you can do something that's very modern in a sense, while still helping kind of a lot of older practices be able to like move forward and like kind of like drag them forward in a sense. So I think for me, health care and design have always been kind of integrated to me, since that's kind of where I've started, and like all the projects I've worked on and all the places I've worked have been in that intersection. I think for once where I'm currently at, it's a little bit more removed from healthcare than I'm used to. So Redox is like an API, and we handle like EHR information. So for once for me, like I'm not thinking about like, oh, is this like HIPAA compliant? I mean, it should be HIPAA compliant, but that's like much more of a dev issue than like my issue for once. Like I don't have to worry about like, oh, can we show them this information? Or like, am I gonna get an angry call from like the government, like from a Medicare patient, like, oh, why are you doing this to me? Like for once, I'm really just focused on like, how does this optimize with like other tech stacks, which is kind of an interesting experience for me. And I'm sure I'll have many more to come. But yes, that is my background.
Thanks, everyone. I feel like there's already so many threads I want to pull apart from everyone's intros. But I guess for me, the actually it's kind of similar to JJ. A lot of my family, and maybe with Josephine as well, a lot of my family was in healthcare, but as like practitioners. So my aunt is, or practitioners or IT, I guess. My aunt has been an ER nurse for, I don't know, 3 decades over at Kaiser. My mom worked in the IT department at Kaiser for a very long time, like 8 to 10 years or something like that. I have several family members in public health. So the entrance in retrospect to healthcare is kind of obvious. And like I was surrounded by it. It's no wonder I'm in it now. But one question I actually was curious about, I think this group maybe self-selects for those who are like extreme, like inordinately more passionate about healthcare, since not only do you work in it, but you opted to come to a conversation about it. But how would you guys think about this like dedication to healthcare as a space when you guys are hiring or involved in the hiring process, whether it's for design or just for others in your company? Like, are you asking about it? How much do you weigh it? Do you feel like the empathy needed in this space is more or less than others that you've worked in?
It's a good question. I come from a very different background than healthcare. I worked at a company that managed musicians and put them together for private events, like mainly weddings, things like that. The actual work was around like the proprietary CRM software that they had built for the company. So it was more like tech oriented. I wasn't really like in the field kind of thing, but I felt like whoever was working at the company had to have much of a passion towards entertainment and providing a living for the artists, in this case musicians, than the people at Particle need to have in order to be a great teammate at Particle, I guess. Like, I feel that within as many of you were saying, like within healthcare, we're at the tech end of the spectrum, so we're like kind of very far removed from the actual patients and even doctors. So it's like, intuitively I would say healthcare needs more of a passion towards it, but in practice I've noticed that it was more relevant in that previous industry than it is here.
Go ahead, JJ.
Thank you. I'm on an iPad, so I actually don't know where my raise hand function is. UX issue, I guess. Yeah, as far as hiring for the team, it's nice when somebody has healthcare experience, but not totally like necessary. I think more than anything else, for the purposes of sort of being familiar with the concerns, right? If somebody's coming from a wildly different industry or an industry that's probably less regulated, it might be a hard transition for them, and that's my main concern. I'm looking for. I look more for somebody who has empathy. I look for somebody who's going to be able, who I can work with every day, that kind of thing. Who's going to fit well with the team, because the rest of it can be taught. But it's more nice to have than anything else. I would never discount a candidate if they didn't, just because they don't have healthcare experience. It's not fair to them, and we're only cutting our own throats if we're willing to just dismiss somebody out of hand like that.
I don't know if I think that it takes more empathy to work in healthcare. I think that empathy is a skill that, like, I believe that there are different kinds of empathy. I believe there are different ways to practice empathy. I believe that there are different levels of empathy, but I think as designers, like, we are empathetic people by nature. It's why we got into the field. I don't think healthcare takes more empathy, because I think I can have just as much empathy for someone whose problem I've decided to solve, no matter what the issue is. I think the difference for me is the risk tolerance, because all of your actions just carry more risk, right? If I decide to move a button from one side of the screen to another and a nurse can't figure out how to start the treatment because of that, that has potentially life or death implications, right? Versus, if I were still working in fintech and I do that, it's like, well, you couldn't, I don't know, check your credit score right at that moment. And that has different kinds of implications. So I think one is risk tolerance, of understanding that there's very different consequences for getting it wrong or for not getting it quite right. And I think the other thing that's really important, and this kind of is jumping off of your point a little bit, JJ, is if you work at a company that has some kind of established presence in the industry, as Flatiron does, where it's been, the EHR has been live for about 10 years, realizing that you're not going to be able to innovate in a way that perhaps a brand new company might, that's allowed to sort of use all these new patterns and leverage all these new things. Because you have a bunch of doctors who are really used to using your service the way that it is, because of regulatory requirements, because of all of these sort of constraints that you have that mean that innovation really has to operate in a very different way and much more slowly. I think those are things that I think are different about healthcare design than perhaps other kinds of design.
Really quickly, sorry, Josephine, I'm just gonna insert really, just want to ask Elena a follow-up question. Like, how do you ask about that in the interview process then? Like, what signals are you looking for, or what questions do you use to understand that?
Yeah, I think some of that comes up in like design exercises, right? And to be fair, like not all design exercises are related to the problem at hand. Like my design exercise was, I think, had something to do with like an alarm clock or something. I don't even remember. It's like something completely unrelated. But I think that, you know, when I first came to Flatiron, I really had to learn to pull back on what I thought was possible. And I think, I don't know if I have a specific question, but maybe thinking a little bit about like if you're in a design exercise, if you're talking through a problem with someone, having an understanding of how they think about the way an idea is developed. So you start with throwing everything at the wall, and then you start to think about how those constraints come together. And the way that that person thinks about constraints and prioritizing things within those constraints, that to me would tell me whether or not this person is ready to sort of, you know, work within the parameters of what might be required for the role.
I want to bounce off of what Elena said about how I don't think healthcare design necessarily requires more empathy, because I have been in a situation where I think it's great that my coworkers are very empathetic, but that empathy sort of became like kind of a ball and chain in a sense, because it's like we couldn't decide on anything because there's always someone who's going to get the short end of the stick. And so I think it's really great that we emphasize empathy in the space, but I think sometimes when that's like the only leading value, it can actually hurt your whole entire product instead, because like as we all know, like you can't design for everyone. You have to like choose your cases that you really want to develop. And so when you really spearhead it with like, we're going to help everyone, it feels very empty, and you just kind of don't get anything done in my experience. Like that could just be me, but that's what I've found. And I also really agree that I think one of the things I've noticed in health tech design the most is that I think like a really valuable skill is being even more comfortable than like, I think your average designer at hearing that you're wrong or that you can't do this. Because I feel like, for example, like the example I was brought up about like switching a button from one side to the other. Usually like if it's, I don't know, if like it's Airbnb, it doesn't really matter if someone's not used to it, but like it's something that seems so minor in healthcare can actually be pretty detrimental. And I think some people aren't a really big fan of hearing that, which is like, you know, totally fine. Everyone is different. I think it's totally valid that if it feels like pretty trivial to you and you don't want to change it, or you like really want to go against the grain, then it's like up to you. But I think that is a really important skill in this particular space, like being able to really be extra detached from your work in a sense, but not take everything personally, and like understand that it's really more than just like your actual company at play. Like there's like industry standards, there's like federal laws regulating what you're doing, and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because what that makes me think of is also like in general, like there are mental models that people have, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel every single time you have a design challenge. But I think that is an interesting factor to consider for some designers too, who like, if you want to do like really broad explorations and like create new paradigms, things like that, healthcare is could be potentially depending on like who your end user is, a difficult place to do that. We had quite a long conversation at the last design rounds about how to effectively roll out a new design or a redesign or a new feature when it impacts like day-to-day operations. Like, for example, Elena, you're talking about like doctors. You change something in their EHR or something that's doctor facing, like that can have huge impacts if they can't complete their work, they're late to the next appointment, whatever it might be. This is a good segue to another question here, which is on the note of empathy, I think, Alfonso, you touched on this a little bit, which is like, we work in health tech, but a vast majority of healthcare members in the United States are like different socioeconomically, et cetera, from those who get to work at these companies. So how do we build, like we all have insurance, but I think everyone on this call, like on the whole is not, we don't need to visit the doctor every single, we have the luxury of taking time off if we need to go see a doctor. But how do we like build that empathy for people who aren't experiencing the world the way we do, or experiencing the healthcare system the way we do? To kind of kick it off, I guess, one thing that we got to do at Oscars, I worked in Oscar for 3 years before Flexpa. And one thing that we had the opportunity to do was listen in on calls with our call center, or listen in on calls with our providers. So Oscar also employed several virtual primary care physicians. So we got to sit in on those calls. And for us as designers, we were sitting in like, because it was contextual inquiry, we got to just like observe how the products are being used. But we also had engineers on rotation listening in on calls too. And it was pretty amazing to hear all the ideas that someone would come up with after just listening to one call. They're like, oh, wow, like this doesn't work, that doesn't work, like this person struggled so hard, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, that's one way we did it, but I'm curious like how you guys think about that empathy building. And for your teams.
Yeah, we try to get, we have regular research sessions where we sit with our users from various types. So whether they're in a clinical setting, whether they're in a community-based organization setting, things like that. And we do have a goal to get everybody in our product team and in our UX team to sit in on a session regularly. I think it's quarterly. We want people in there to actually see how people use our product. And it is tremendously eye-opening. I sit in on sessions every chance I get. It's a very valuable tool.
Yeah, building off of that, we're really fortunate to have a couple really good researchers on our team who regularly conduct user testing with our products. And but yeah, I've been able to sit in on a couple of them and see people just like move around the mouse and interact with our designs in real time and just like say what they're thinking. And it's really grounding, to see, to get like the designs out of your head and actually into somebody who would use this on a regular basis. And kind of seeing that kind of like, just direct feedback on how people interact with your work. It's informative, not only, from a design perspective, but also when you're trying to get buy-in from other people inside the company, like say engineers, for example, like at my previous place where engineers have like significant, say in what gets built or not. I may just kind of be talking to them, give them design arguments and be like, it makes sense like this, but they're like, no, from an engineering perspective, you just need to do this. The user just needs to do this and this. But like, introducing like, okay, our users aren't getting it this way, they're getting it this way. And then it kind of helps move the conversation a bit, like when you're trying to advocate like internally when the user is not there. Yeah.
So at Flatiron, we have, I think, a few different methodologies. We do actually use full story. We just started using it around this time last year. It is heavily redacted, but we have enough of it like that we can see such that we can kind of understand user behaviors, and then like finding things like rage clicks and sort of funnels has been really helpful to sort of understand, but it's also not representative, right? We've got like a dozen practices out of, 100 on there. So we also have like a monthly thing called the CSAT. I forget what it stands for, but basically it's like all the feedback that we got from customers that month that they put into the app. We have people go through it and code it, and then there's a review that goes out. We do have user research, but because we work with clinicians so much, it's hard to get in front of them all the time. Another thing that we're spoiled by is that we have about 100 clinicians, some of whom are still practicing on staff. So sometimes we can kind of tap them and say, hey, here's some things we were thinking about. Can you talk to us more about what this would look like in actual clinic? And then last but not least, we have these things called go lives, which is when a practice goes live on our software. Sometimes they'll send some schmucks like me who don't really know what they're doing to go and help out, which I did last month, which was enormously eye-opening just to see like how the thing is actually used in a practice. And when one little thing frustrates a clinician, just how disruptive it is to the entire day and to a patient. I think one thing that makes this really complicated is that you're also working with so many different stakeholders or users, right? So it's like, who do you have empathy for? Because one issue that we have is that when we go into a practice and we set up the EHR in a certain way to customize to that practice, the admins want one thing, the nurses want one thing, and the doctors want another. And you're getting pulled in a bunch of different directions. And then you also have some kind of responsibility to the patient, right? So the question becomes like, when you're thinking about empathy and who's really the person who's going to be at the very end of this product, who do you need to be thinking about first and foremost? If you were to prioritize that list such that you're building empathy for the person who is the most vulnerable, who's the person who we really need to be designing for at the basic level.
So is full story, do you redact it through full story? Full story has a way to like blotch out certain parts of the screen or something. I haven't used it in years and I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's a couple of ways. You can do it through full story, but you can also do it as part of your code base. You can tag certain elements to be masked. And you can also do it through full story. Full story has a way for you to mask things and unmask things. And there are some things that are masked automatically, like credit card number will never show up, or we don't have that, but like obviously all PHI is completely anonymized. So really what we have is like some buttons and like the structures of pages, just enough to show us what we need to see.
Interesting. Okay, I'll have to take a look back at full story again. We
Yeah.
started looking at Posthog, which is a fully self-hosted, essentially full story, which would mean, if you have your SOC 2 and your compliance certifications, it's all the data supposedly that's passing through your system anyways.
Right.
Interesting.
So I will just plus one both the ideas of showing users being frustrated with the product, getting buy-in from that and empathy, especially with non-UXers you may be working with. Also hands-on experience with the products, seeing something that might not perform very quickly is really eye-opening as well. But one thing that I think Unitas really does well is our use of personas. We have honestly almost dozens at this point. It's something that our products team use, our engineers use. We had a presentation yesterday. One of the engineers printed out a persona and had it physically next to his monitor to know this is who I'm working for. And the big selling point for me internally was how the personas are actually metrics based and data based. I have plenty of thoughts about how personas are used in different industries or more specifically misused. But just the fact that the personas we have are based off of actual people is super valuable for sure.
That is so good to hear, because my previously personal opinion was personas take so much work and it's so hard to integrate it into an actual process in a useful way. The Unitas team, would you guys be open to sharing an example of your persona so we can like see what you mean by it being quantitative and how you guys use it? I don't know which of the Unitas team.
I'd have to defer to JJ.
Well, it actually might be useful to actually connect you with the woman who created our persona library, one of our UX researchers. I'd be happy to do that.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right, let me segue to okay, so what's the right way to format this question? I think what is it, like 10,000 people per day are just now aging into Medicare, so they're turning 65, which means when the internet boom happened, they were in their careers, like middle of their career. So a lot of the stereotypes that like, oh, the elderly, like they don't know how to use their phones, they don't know how to use their computers, like I think that's more and more becoming outdated. And we see like our parents or young grandparents being quite savvy on their phones. However, I have noticed, at least, like there's still this like resistance, or maybe like the transition period to use tech more and trust tech and like have the security or the belief in like strong security in an app that you're using is still not quite there. So for example, in like my experience, we have like a lot of customer service agents at health plans tell our potential clients or our customers like, no, we strongly advise you not to share any health data with a third-party application. And like, without knowing any of the details, I think that is good advice. You shouldn't willy-nilly share it with any third-party application, but like, what's like the first domino to fall to get more people comfortable? Or like, what do we need to showcase? Like, what needs to be in the privacy policy? How do we change consent such as not just a check mark and continue, like people actually feel trust with the system? Or yeah.
So I can't speak on like how to actually solve the problem as a blanket, but previously I was working at this Medicaid home care matching platform for Washington State, and I think they've like expanded to New York. I don't know about other states, but because it was kind of like a free marketplace, there was a lot of trust issues because it's like, how can I guarantee that the person who's coming to my home, one, is safe, and two, someone that I would get along with? And so I think the issue of trust and technology has been like a really, really prominent issue for that space specifically in that problem. And the way that we were tackling it was just by kind of growing, which I know sounds like really, really obtuse, but truthfully, that was probably like the one thing that really helped snowball us, because it was kind of like the first 10 people, it was really hard to convince them to use it. The next 100, it maybe took like 80% of that convincing. And then once we got to a few thousand, there were people who were spreading by like word of mouth. And I believe that's like pretty common within like childcare circles too. Like anything that's like very vulnerable, people tend to really trust people that they already know. And I think like we can all probably feel pretty similar. Like if your friend tells you that like I've used this and this is pretty good, you probably wouldn't mind like sharing some more personal information. But if it's like something you just found through like an Instagram ad or like a Google ad, you're probably a little bit more hesitant to share anything or divulge anything that would identify you pretty specifically. So not really a great answer, but that is kind of one real life example that I've seen and been a part of.
So my example is not from healthcare, it's from e-commerce. And at this point, it's probably 9 years old. So I'm not sure if it's going to be super helpful. But we did have this specific question back in my days at Foot Locker. And I remember we did some user testing around what would make our customers feel more safe about completing a transaction on the websites. And kind of silly, but it was honestly just simple visual cues like a padlock next to the checkout button or a specific company they might recognize in the footer. So just sometimes just a small visual update can make a big difference.
This is like kind of a defeatist answer, but I think on some level it's out of our hands. I think the distrust that we see in healthcare is a broader distrust of tech in general. And there's good reason for it, unfortunately. Not always, because of every industry in which you can throw a tech after. I think that until there's broader trust of technology and a broader understanding of what privacy means in technology, we are going to suffer from the same wave of consumer distrust that a financial institution or a gaming app or any other kind of industry might as well.
I found the raise hand button. So yeah, funny you should mention the financial industry, Elena. I actually was in financial services prior to joining Unite Us. And part of my mission there was to help a credit union with their digital transformation. How do we get people start using things like online banking? Because they were very traditional in their outlook, and they had a hard time getting traction, getting people to actually use it, to use their app. And what it came down to in that case, and people, for better or for worse, people tend to look out for their money more than their health, quite frankly, or a lot of people do. And what it came down to wasn't about trust necessarily, because nobody reads privacy policies. Let's be honest here. It came down to value. If you can provide value to the user, you're going to use it. And that's for better or for worse, right? And a lot of, there's plenty of apps out there taking advantage of that. But that's what it came down to. Wasn't about like, hey, trust us. I mean, they've already put their money with us, right, at the financial institution. It came down to saying, hey, all that stuff you've been coming into the branch for, now you can do it from your pocket, and really made it about them and how it made their life better. So that was both a UX challenge in the app and a marketing challenge outside of it. I think we can do the same thing with healthcare, and social care. Is how does this make your life better? Make it about the person receiving the care, and that'll kind of work itself out. It's not the only solution, but I think it's part of an array of solutions.
So kind of going off a little bit of what Elena was saying, I think a big part of it is outside of our hands and kind of, due to the general state of the world. I mean, we just came out of I don't want to say we just came out of, but with the pandemic, the past 3 years, during that time when I was working at our last company, we had to make a hard pivot to telehealth and being able to set up our clients with that. And prior to that, a lot of our patients had never done that, never even considered that, talking to a doctor over a phone. Not to mention that, but now, out of necessity, the needs that they need to get addressed, that, kind of overpowers, those, those hesitations that they have towards embracing technology. That, and in addition to regulatory, space accommodating, telehealth and things like that. But yeah, for a lot of these things, we're going to have solutions, there's those going to be technical solutions, and people may have their reservations toward them, but for better or for worse, as time goes on, the necessity, for their problems to get solved is at some point gonna become greater than, people's resistance to, trying new technologies and things like that, for better or for worse. And just what I've seen.
Indeed, for better or for worse. Well, this is for better or for worse, and eventually is a good segue into this last question. So we've kind of accidentally ended a lot of our design rounds with like a food for thought question. Usually they're from Yuhan because he has really great food for thought questions. This one today was spurred by a TED Med or MedTED. I think it's called MedTED talk that I was listening to, which is, what do you guys think is going to be obvious 5 to 10 years from now that we maybe aren't thinking enough about now in the space in general? And the one that the MedTED talk that I was looking at that made me think of this is, like, will our grandchildren look back at us and be like, how barbaric was it that when you needed a kidney transplant, you needed somebody else's kidney, versus it being like a bioprinted organ, which I think, like, if you guys have seen, that technology is actually pretty impressive now.
So is it like, what do you think is gonna be like the big thing, or like commonplace, like?
Commonplace more. It does, like, big thing or not, I don't know, but like what might be commonplace that we're not thinking like enough about. And Elena, I love your comments. I'm just gonna voice it over for the audio here, but the topic is not totally sure what the exact thing will be, but something in the realm of women's health.
Sorry, you said what is going to be obvious? That doesn't mean obvious right now, or?
Yeah, well, I guess that's a little self-referential, but what might be something that is commonplace? I like Richard's word for that, commonplace, 5 to 10 years from now, that we're either not thinking about yet or should be thinking about now. Jake, yeah, AI being the heart of whatever it is.
I would like to think some sort of like blockchain driven thing where the patient has complete control over their own data. Like, you know, maybe a few 3 years ago, everyone was like really hopeful about that, with Ethereum coming in, and then like NFTs and how it could be like expanded to everything else. And for me, the biggest one was like healthcare and your own information. But I don't know if it's going anywhere, but hopefully it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's difficult to, like, you wouldn't want to actually store data on chain, but you would want the access control to be on chain.
Yeah.
I guess kind of going a bit off of what Alonso said. I think maybe things pertaining to remote monitoring are going to become a lot more commonplace. Hopefully, you know, with people's consent, people consenting to, you know, share that information. Younger generations' views on privacy do deviate a lot from previous generations. You know, people are a lot more comfortable with willingly sharing things online. I mean, even in our iPhones, you know, you can share your location. Like my family, we share our locations with each other, so we can always see where we are. And I think that trend is going to continue, where people hopefully, you know, choose to share information, health, monitoring, etc., things like that. But yeah, hopefully it turns out better than dystopian.
Yes, 100% agreed. On that note, to utopia, not dystopia. thank you guys so much for joining. We have 2 minutes left, but like I said, I'm just gonna end a little bit early today to bio break and set up for my next meeting. But awesome conversation. Thank you to the Unite Us team for joining. The next one will be July, whatever the first Thursday of July will be. But I'll send out an email afterwards as well, including a feedback form. So any thoughts that you guys have to improve the session, improve registration, improve whatever about it. Hopefully it's, like I said, I always get a lot out of these conversations, so hopefully others do too. But thank you guys so much. Enjoy the start of the second half of 2023.